Good evening. Welcome to Planet Word, the only museum in the country dedicated to renewing and inspiring a love of words, language, and reading. My name is Britt Oates, Manager of Public Programs, and on behalf of myself and the entire Planet Word team, we're super excited to welcome you to tonight's special programming event. This is Eyes on Reading, Maximizing Phonics Instruction Through Differentiation with Wiley Blevins. Tonight's program will include a talk and a presentation by Mr. Wiley Blevins, followed by a brief Q&A. So let's go ahead and introduce our esteemed guest. Wiley Blevins studied at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Bowling Green State University and has his doctorate in education. He is an author, educational consultant, and researcher, and has taught both in the United States and South America. Wiley has written over 17 books for teachers, including A Fresh Look at Phonics, Phonics from A to Z, and Choosing and Using Decodable Texts. And he has authored several phonics and reading programs, including Sadlier's From Phonics to Reading. He also wrote the Phonics Brief by International Literacy Association, Meeting the Challenges of Early Literacy Phonics Instruction, and he has penned over 100 children's books. Yeah. Wiley's current focus is on adaptive technology, differentiated professional development, and children's literature. He is Senior Vice President and Associate Publisher at Raycraft Books, a new imprint focused on publishing books by authors and illustrators from underrepresented groups. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Wiley Blevins.
Good evening. I'm just waiting for my presentation to appear. How is everyone? There we go. That looks like me, sort of. Probably the same outfit. That's okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining me for a brief chat on differentiating phonics instruction for maximum impact. I talk really fast. I live in New York City now, and I've kind of adopted their way of speaking. So if at any point you want me to stop or slow down, please just shout out. I tell people I live in New York City. I get shouted at all the time, so it won't scare me. And also, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, I'm happy to give it to you so we can talk about how to get that to you. Sound good? Okay. So whenever I talk about differentiation, there are three responses that I typically get. And I want you all to read these three responses nice and loud. Are you ready? The first response I get is, what? And that is quickly followed by, no. And sometimes that is followed by, impossible. I do want to make it very clear, I'm not making fun of some random child. That's actually the kindergarten school photo of my nephew, Trevor. We are very proud of him. Anyway, that's a whole different story for a different topic. So why is the reaction differentiation so extreme sometimes? You even see on social media people talking about, oh, this isn't possible, we can't do this, and what have you. I think part of it is because where we are in many of our classrooms is very far away from where our students need to be. And I'm going to talk a lot about some of the things that I do in the schools that I work in. I'm in New York City. I'm working in the public schools there now. I don't know if you've heard. Probably wouldn't, there's no reason to, but New York City is going through this massive transition. Over 2 years, all the schools have to transition from the way they've been teaching reading for the past 20 years or so to structured literacy. It is a massive shift. And so I'm at a school, we call it our lab school, where we've been studying this transition and studying how to scale it up in the district. And so I'll talk a lot about that. But part of where we are that has me concerned is most reading programs really teach to the middle. Would you agree with that? So if you're meeting grade level expectations, it's fine. But if you're below grade level expectations, probably you're a bit frustrated. If you're above grade level expectations, you're probably a bit bored. If you're learning English as an additional language, there might not be all the supports and scaffolds you need to connect to that content or contextualize that learning. And I always say, students who are bored or frustrated, they're probably not sitting there quietly smiling. Would you agree? Yes, and we don't want to waste an instructional moment. A lot of programs do have differentiated supports, but they might be in the sidebar. It's not very clear when to do them or how to do them. And that's a problem because where we need to be is having those supports that fit very nicely into the natural flow of the lesson. That's just a part of what we typically do in whatever instructional routine where we've pre-thought the different needs that our students have. So I'll talk a lot about how we've done that in the schools that I'm working at in New York City. Another issue with the differentiation is we often don't have the tools to collect the data that give us the information to differentiate as we're going through our instruction. Most schools have assessments beginning, middle, and end of year. Sound familiar to you? Could be big assessments like Acadians that we use in New York City or Dibbles or something like that. But those in-between moments where you're monitoring where students are, often those resources aren't there. So where we need to get to is creating those easy data collection tools, those moments in our instruction where it's simple to collect that data and use that data to modify instruction as we go through that week or the upcoming weeks. That's been a really big shift for the teachers in New York. So are you guys familiar with like the level system, like level A, level B? So for about the past 20 years, when teachers in New York would call their students to small group, they would call over their Bs and they'd pick up a B book, or they'd call over their Ds and they'd pick up a D book. Now what they're required to do is call over those students who need more support, spelling words with long A, spelled A-I-A-Y. Do you see the shift? That is a massive shift. How do we collect the data to do that kind of precise, skill-based support that our students need? So we've had to work on creating those data collection tools, and I'll show you some of what we've done. Very, very simple tools, and also when and for whom are we going to collect that data? It's one thing to say, I want you to collect data on your students. It's another thing to be able to have the time and space to do that. Would you agree? So we've really had to look at our lessons throughout the week. When is a great moment to collect some information on student spelling or on students reading? And how many students is it reasonable to do that? So I want to share with you some of the things we've done in that space as well, because that's where we've had to go in order to make all of this work. Just a sort of a basic example of how detailed we have to be with our differentiation. Most of the students in the school that I work with speak a language other than English at home. So when we're talking about phonics lesson, it's not just phonics, it's also vocabulary. And so the lessons have to serve both purposes. So if we have a list of words that we're practicing how to blend or sound out, and my students have just put together the sounds for S, L, E, D. What word did they just read? How many of you think many of them have no idea what a sled is? Right. So what we have to do, if they've read the word S-L-E-D, we have to show a picture of a sled. And then we have to say sled in their home language to connect to that home language. And so we've been having to create those resources ourselves, find those pictures, have that translation app, all of those things that we've had to do. We now have some help from publishers who are giving us some of those resources, but that's the level of differentiation we have to do to meet our students' needs and to get them where they need to be. So to have the space for differentiation, the efficiency of our instruction matters. We have to have the structures in place to have the time to do this. How many of you would say pacing is an issue in your classrooms or the schools that you work in? The pacing of instruction. Everywhere, that's a big issue. So it's one of the things that we've had to tackle. So when I began this work in New York City, and I started going to classrooms just seeing where teachers were, I visited one of our second grade teachers who was our strongest teacher. They always take me to the strongest teacher first when I start this work. And so she was teaching a lesson. The phonics lessons in the curriculum New York City has are 40 minutes long. So they're very long lessons. And she was teaching blending, modeling how to sound out words, and that part of the lesson took 20 minutes. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? A bad thing, right? Because there are other parts of the lesson she didn't get to and some really important parts. When I counted how many words the students read on their own, they read 4 words. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Is it easy to differentiate instruction when the children are reading 4 words? No. Where we needed her to get to was to only spend about 5 to 6 minutes on that routine and read about 25 words. And those 25 words, we can have some words with the target skill, we can have some review words from previously taught skills, and we can have some challenge words so everyone gets what they need. So we have to get the pacing where it needs to be in order to even have the space to do the differentiation. Does that make sense? Yeah. This is second grade. Second grade. So we had to start using timers. So we would time. This is 5 minutes. When the timer goes off, you move on, and we're going to talk about the inefficiencies. There were a lot of things that we could trim right away. A lot of extra blah blah at the beginning of a lesson that we just cut. Teachers, when we weren't there, would use their iPads and film themselves, because sometimes you're not aware of how much you're talking, and then when you see, you're like, oh my gosh, I spent like 3 minutes, and my students stared at me like I had 3 heads, and nothing was done. Also, just being very explicit and direct. I remember one of the first lessons we went into, the teacher was teaching the prefix re, and she started the lesson in a discovery kind of way. She said, what do you guys know about re? They all stared at her like you are now. She goes, re. What do you know about re? Like reread. And they just kept looking at her, and a couple of students were trying to help her out. And finally, the principal, who was standing beside me, yelled, tell them. We all kind of jumped. But it's a really important point. We're talking about phonics. We want it to be very impactful, very precise, explicit to the point, and get through the meat of what we're doing. So we had to have a whole training on what explicit instruction is, what it looks like, when is it appropriate, and when can we do other things? When is incidental learning appropriate, and those kinds of things, just to get the pacing where it needed to be. Does it make a difference? Yes, yes. We also need to monitor what all students need throughout the lesson. If we wanted differentiation to differentiate, it's one thing to plan in advance, and I'll talk a lot about all the things we do to plan in advance, but you also have to monitor as you're going through. So when I first started this work, a lot of classrooms that I would go in, the teacher would ask a question. A lot of students would raise their hand, right? Oh, pick me. She would call on one student. The other students would put their hands down, feeling kind of dejected. The student would answer. She would repeat the answer and move on. So let's say we have 25 students. We know what one child thinks. Do we know what the other 24 think? Do we know if they would have answered the same thing? No. Do we know if there are misunderstandings? So we had to put a stop to that. So every time a child responds, all the other children have to respond to the child's response in a nonverbal way. So if we ask a question, I'm going to show you what these look like. If we ask a question and it's just one answer, then it's a core response. Like if I ask, what color is grass? Everyone? Green. Then I can move on. But if I had a more in-depth question, maybe you had to find evidence in a text or talk with a partner, then I would have to slow down, give you that think time, that work time, what have you. And let's say you answered. I wouldn't say anything. I would look at everyone, and the students have to give me a nonverbal. I agree, I disagree, or I want to add on to what that child said. Think about what that means. So a child answered, and a lot of children went agree, but there were a couple who said disagree with their hands. Now I know there's a misunderstanding here. I know who to talk to, who to build on, right? Sometimes the children who will signal add on, that will give us a really great natural conversation to dig into that concept. If a child answers incorrectly and all the students are doing this, I have a big problem in my hands, right? There's a big misunderstanding. There are some other signs that we use in order to check as we're going through the lesson. If at any point a child has a question, they just use the signal for question. You can't really see this, but when we ask a question, we'll have the students, when they're ready to answer, just to put their hands on their desk with their thumb up. Because what we found is a lot of times we didn't give children proper think time to really think through the question and find their answer, and that has helped. And there's one other hand signal that has been super important to the efficiency of our lessons. Can anyone guess what that might be? What's the number one question you get asked by children all the time? Can I go to the bathroom? That is so funny. It's true. So they just make the signal, we nod our head, they do their business, and we go on. So it's not a disruption. But this has completely changed the flow of a lesson. Now the children are on the edge of their seats. They're responding to everything. We know who knows what, and they are engaged the entire way. That has really changed what we're able to do with our students and how we're able to correct misunderstandings. So we talk about pacing being a big deal. We've also had to look at what I call the choreography of lessons. That's not a scientific term. I made it up, so you don't have to repeat it. But think about, how many of you teach very young children, like kindergarten, first, second grade? Right, 40 minutes is a long lesson. Would you agree? So a child can't sit for 40 minutes. Would you agree? Yes. So we have to think about when are they on the carpet? What's appropriate to do there? When are they at their seats? What are they doing when they're moving? When do they have something in their hand like their whiteboard or a book or a pencil? And we really had to manage that flow and move things around in a lesson so there is a better flow, that they're moving and things are moving in order to keep them engaged at all points. And so we've had to do some work around that. That has been very helpful. But in terms of engagement, one of the things that I look at very intensely when I watch a phonics lesson is I count the number of words children read and the number of words they write. And I count the number of minutes they have a book in their hand and the number of minutes they have a pencil in their hand. We already talked about, I'm looking at core responses and partner exchanges versus one student moving on. This has been really transformative for the teachers that I work with because it matters, the intensity of the practice that students get in that short phonics lesson. This year, we added a second lab school. So I went to see the teachers teach at the beginning of the school year. They took me to the best second grade teacher again. That's where we always start. The teacher taught for 40 minutes. We went to debrief. The administrators from the school and the district were praising the teacher about how she had implemented the lesson with fidelity. How many of you have heard the word fidelity? Right. Very, very happy. And I agree, she implemented exactly the way the lesson was written. And then I asked, how many words did the children read on their own during that 40 minutes? No one knew. No one thought to think that that would be even important. How many words do you think the second graders read? 3. How many words did they write? 1. So it was my turn to talk, and I'm sweating like, oh my God, I have to deliver this horrible news to them. And I just said, how on God's green earth are we going to get students where they need to be if they're reading 3 words and writing 1 in 40 minutes? Our goal is fluency. Our goal is fluency. That's not going to happen. So it's great that you know the program well, but it's clear there are some flaws in the materials. We have to fix that, and we have to get the intensity of the practice where it needs to be. And so these are all things that we've had to consider in order to make what we're doing work. So differentiation can be in lots of places. It can be small group, it can be whole group, and so on. I want to talk about a couple projects that I've been involved in that sort of show this range. I just finished a 2-year study in Ohio at the end of the school year last year, and it was funded by the Ohio Department of Education. And what they asked me to do, the materials that I had created were used in the study. And what they had me do was to locate the bottom performing kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students. And those students were going to get an extra dose of literacy before the literacy block. But the instruction was going to be delivered by tutors. And that's what they wanted me to study. I was very nervous about that because when I think about the highest need students, I tend to want to put them with who? Highest qualified adult, right. But that's not the reality in a lot of schools. They don't have the personnel. So can we make it work with tutors? And these happen to be college students, many of whom were studying to become teachers. And so I did the trainings for them, and there was a local university who monitored it throughout the year. And I think what we found will come as no surprise. But I want to focus on kindergarten because it's a big topic of conversation in New York. How many of you, who teaches kindergarten here? Anyone? Just one, okay, 2, 3. So we'll stare at you for the next couple of minutes. That's okay. Do we know by mid-kindergarten who's at risk? We absolutely know. With beyond a shadow of a doubt, we know. But the problem is, when I ask this question, everyone will say, yes, we know. Then I'll say, what's your plan? Because it should be all hands on deck, hair on fire, triage at that point for these children. And rarely is there a plan. Would you agree with that? One of the things that we found when we did this, we identified children for a host of reasons who were what was deemed in need of urgent intervention the first week of kindergarten and gave them this extra dose. None of the children at the end of the first year who were designated in need of urgent intervention needed it by April. It was such a problem that the second year of the study, we had to bring on a new school so we had enough children for the study. Is that a good problem to have? Yes, that's the kind of problem we want to have. And you see, the children were making intensive growth by doing this extra dose from the beginning. The one thing about kindergarten is I feel like kindergarten, I always joke that kindergarten is like college now compared to when I was in school. It's very intense. It's very fast-paced. And if you haven't had like years of preschool experience or what have you, you're coming to our school and you don't speak English, you are so far behind. And if we just deliver what is in the main curriculum, it's not going to meet their needs. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So we're having lots of conversation about how we double dose our kindergartens going forward. But we also, our kindergarten and first grade students in the study made really great progress. Second and third graders made progress, but it was much less. It was much slower. It's much harder. Would you agree with that? Yeah. We also found ways to utilize every adult, even the tutors who aren't as trained. If we give them the right kinds of materials and the right kinds of structures in place, we can take advantage of their talents and their desire to help. In our school, at the lab school in New York City, we're very fortunate that we have a structure in place where the small group happens at the same time for a chunk of the grade. So every adult in the building has a small group. Our gym teacher has a small group. Our art teacher has a small group. Everyone gets intensive small group work. We've been able to do that. Not all schools have that capacity, but we've been very lucky to do that. So I'm in New York City. I live right here, like a building in. Anyone recognize this place? Yeah, this is where most people in New York never want to go to. Happens to be where I live. It's very loud and very noisy, but that's okay. And like I said, New York City is going through this massive transition. This is the school that I started at last year. So New York City is divided into 30-some. We don't have a school board or anything like that. I don't know how DC is organized, but we have a chancellor who's appointed by our mayor, so it's a political appointee. And then we're divided into 30-some sub-districts, each with its own superintendent. So I'm in a sub-district in Queens. Anyone ever heard of Queens? Say woo, woo, woo. Now you're welcome to come to Queens. Great. We actually have a name. Yeah, we're a PS also, but we have a name. We're in Far Rockaway. Are you familiar with Far Rockaway? Yeah. So we're in a community that is kind of ignored by New York because we're so far out. I always joke it takes me longer to get there by subway than I can get to Philadelphia. It's like an hour and a half subway ride just to get to my school. Yeah. But this is a school that's in a neighborhood that's had generational poverty, generational literacy. We are near a center for people who are seeking asylum. You may have seen on the news, like, people are crossing the border, and the governor of Texas put them in buses, and you always wonder where they go. Well, many of the children we get to see, and we get the pleasure of working with them. It's been very exciting to do that kind of work. When the principal took over several years ago, only 9% of the students were on grade level. So this is a school that has needed a massive transition, and she and her team have worked amazing things. Last year we put in some things. This year we put in some things. We were very curious what would happen with our first grade data, because our kindergartners were the first to get sort of a heavy dose of structured literacy. I just want to show you where we are versus where we need to go. This was our mid-year first grade data. 51% of our first graders tested above grade level expectations, and 20 tested on grade level. That's 71. We still have a long way to go, right? And of course, yeah, we have students who are just learning English or what have you. That's not an excuse to us. We still have to get them where they need to be, but we're seeing movement, and that's what's exciting. We're seeing big movement, and here again, we have a lot of work to do, but it's finally great to see things happening for our students. And so this is the work that we're doing. Our goal really is to strengthen our Tier 1 resources, make them as powerful as possible so that we have fewer and fewer and fewer students who need Tier 2 and Tier 3 support. Raise your hand if you think that's a good goal. Yeah. We want to lessen that. So our first step, which I'm not going to get in today, was to do curricular surgery. I talked about everyone praising the teacher for using a program with fidelity, but then the kids only reading 3 words and writing 1. That program wasn't where it needed to be. So I had to analyze all the parts of the program and make those fixes. So that was step 1. While we were doing that, we went to looking at how we differentiate, and that's the bulk of what I'm going to talk about today. Normally, we'd get the program in place first and then do the differentiation very slowly, but we had to do it simultaneously because our needs were so great. So when I talk about differentiation, I'm really talking about pre-planned things that we know our students need based on our data and our observations. So we know certain students might need, and I'm going to show you a bunch of these extra supports. We're going to have them naturally in the flow of the lesson. So we look at every part of the lesson, like the blending. How are we going to differentiate that? The dictation, how are we going to differentiate that? We just went routine by routine, lesson part by lesson part, until it became second nature for our teachers. It wasn't so easy. So we did blending. We thought, okay, we have that, but we noticed that not everyone really had it. So we needed to move to dictation, but we reviewed blending and kept working at it. We just slowly added on as we went, and it just became more and more cumulative, the kind of work that we're doing. But there are also things that we need to do while we're teaching. Those of you who teach know that you're adapting on the spot, right? So there are these adaptive moves, on-the-fly teaching moves, but the only way our teachers were able to do this is if they really study the lessons and anticipate possible issues. We're not talking about big issues like the students below grade level expectations, I need to do X, Y, Z, things that might pop up. I want to give you sort of a basic example. When we do dictation, let's say you're going to dictate the word making or taking or baking. You can anticipate a spelling error some of your students might make. What's that error? They're going to keep the E there, right? So we need to think about, if we're doing dictation, what are the possible errors our students might make? What are we going to say or do in that moment? Because a lot of our teachers didn't know. So on the fly, they weren't responding the way they needed to be or what have you. So just when in our planning, anticipating issues has been a big part of what we've been doing in the work we're doing with our teachers. So this is kind of my mantra. If you want to read this while I take a sip of water, 1, 2, 3, read. Agree? Excellent. And we talked about how most curriculum is aimed at the middle. Our phonics curriculum in New York is definitely just aimed at the middle, so there was a lot of space for what we had to do. So let me tell you a little bit about where my thinking is with this. And some people disagree, and it's okay if you do, but my whole focus has been on how do we have all of our students access grade level content. For a long time, students would be assessed on their phonics and placed along a continuum and just receive that instruction and march through. And it made sense on paper. But what we found in our schools is what would happen if you were in first grade and you hadn't mastered some kindergarten skills. You were put in small group and kindergarten skills, and you slowly moved those skills. All of a sudden, first grade's over, and there are all these first grade skills you've never seen. So you went into second grade further behind. So my take has been, let's provide the whole group instruction that is giving students access to grade level content, provide those supports and scaffolds so they have access to it, and then during small group, we're going to really target those skills, maybe previous skills they haven't mastered, and hit those really hard. Or maybe they already know the whole group, and we're going to accelerate them, move them further in the scope and sequence, and we can do that. That's sort of our take, yeah. Yes, I'm going to show you how we do that. So that's a really great example, because what I'm going to show you in first grade is when we just started long vowels, you're going to see all the short vowel work. But keep in mind, that work is also happening in small group. The students for whom this doesn't apply are students who are newcomers. If you're a newcomer, we can't put you in third grade phonics, right? We're going to put you where you need to be and move you as quickly as you can. And also some of our students who have IEPs. We have what are called 12-to-1 classrooms in New York City. They're 12 students and they have 2 adults in the room, and those students are placed where they are in terms of where they're performing academically. So you could be in third grade but be in second grade phonics. Does that make sense? So those are the exceptions to that. But most of our students get this differentiated work during the whole group time. So I want to go through an overview and then we'll go into the specifics. Oh man, this time is going too fast. So The above level students, we have to enrich what's happening during the whole group so they get something. If it's a lesson's 40 minutes, they need to get something out of it. I can't waste 40 minutes of their time. And then we can accelerate their growth during small group by placing them further in the scope and sequence and systematically moving them. So if we're doing an activity like a word sort, there are 10, this is first grade, there are 10 long A words, right? They're one-syllable words. For some of our students, that's way too easy. So what am I going to do during that sort so they get something? Well, I can replace 5 of those words with multisyllabic long A words. And then they're getting something median. All I had to do was switch out 5 words. Just give them the new list of words, not a big deal. For reading a decodable, my preference, and I try to say when it's my preference, because if it's just my preference, it doesn't mean you have to do it, right? So it's my what? Do you have to do it? Is it the law? No, okay. So my preference is I like students to read that decodable the first day just because I want to really check if they are fluent. And also, one of the things about decodables, because there's such a high concentration of words with a specific spelling pattern, seeing those patterns over and over helps build children's statistical awareness of when to use those patterns in writing. So it actually has a positive impact on their spelling. Many of our above grade level readers aren't above grade level in spelling. Would you agree with that? So we need to do some of that intensive work. But if we're reading the story 3-4 days, that's going to really bore those children, right? So there are days when they're reading it to a partner. There are days when they're whisper reading it. Do I need them to read that, or can I have them just during that time read the book we're using in small group? That's a more advanced skill. Just a swap of a material. No one's moving, no one's doing anything else. They're just picking up a different book. We're trying to find really easy swaps like that during the flow of the lesson where we can meet those needs. Our students who are below grade level expectations, there's a lot of focus on that. Certainly we have to front load content so that they're ready for that whole group instruction. A lot of times I think people think of small group as you've done your lesson, a bunch of students failed, now you're going to do something, right? But if we know our students, we know some of them are going to fail or it's going to be challenging. Why don't we do some small group before the whole group and get them ready? So if it's a decodable, it's not the first time they've seen it. So this is how we're thinking. We're also modifying expectations during some of the activities. I'll show you some examples. I want to be very clear when I talk about modifying expectations, I'm not talking about lowering them. I'm talking about modifying like how much content they'll do. So if we have our list of words that we're practicing and there are like 10 rows of words and we have a couple of minutes to practice, there are children who will shut down. It's just too much. So if I say, you over here, I want you to read rows 1 and 2, which are some new words, and rows 7 and 8, which are some review words, they can do that in the time. So I'm managing their expectations, they're getting the practice they need, and I'm not overwhelming them. And of course, we're going to address previous skills during small group. So let's go back to our word sort. There are all these long A words, A-I, A-Y, they're still working on short vowels, right? I'm going to replace 5 of those words with short A words. So they're going to have in their sort long A words like rain and pain, but they're also going to have short A words like ran and pan. And then we can contrast short A to long A. So it's making those strategic swaps, and they're getting something they need, plus the grade level content. When we're doing a decodable, if we're doing a long A and they're still working on short vowels, this is going to be a bit challenging for them. So I'm going to front load it during small group. We're going to do an echo read and talk about the story and build some vocabulary and understanding. Maybe they'll listen to a recording of the story during small group time so that when they come to whole group, it's not their first time seeing it. It's their second or third. Can they more fully participate in that work? Yeah, but it's more structured. It's very, very structured. Exactly. But that's what we do. And so we get them ready to meet those demands. Okay. And then for our multilingual learners, obviously work on articulation, sound spelling transfer, and tons of vocabulary. Everything has to be contextualized, and I showed you an example of what we have to do there. So my job has been looking at every instruction routine in the lessons and how do I modify it for students above grade level, below grade level, and our students learning English as a second language, and then slowly folding that into the routines that our teachers are doing. And that's been our task. Does this look hard and overwhelming? Yeah, so we do it just a piece at a time, one routine at a time, and we slowly build capacity. So I want to get into, in the last 25 minutes I have, I'm going to get into some specifics. So there are these 7 characteristics of strong phonics instruction. There are key routines around many of these, like blending and dictation and the reading of our decodable connected text. And then my work, which I started back in 2010, resulted in these 10 reasons why phonics instruction sometimes fails. And these are obstacles we want to unplug from our instruction. The first one that I always have to look at is what? Everyone read number 1 together. 1, 2, 3, read. You're going to hear me talk about that a lot. So what typically happens in a curriculum? You teach one skill this week. What do you do the next week? Brand new skill. What do you do the week after that? Right. Do students master a skill typically in 5 days in reading and writing? No, it's not reasonable. When we are introducing a new skill, it really is just the beginning of the exploration of that skill. For the students that I work with, we spend about the next 4 to 6 weeks folding it in a very systematic way so that we give them the time and the space to really master it in reading and spelling. And it takes a lot longer in spelling, which is why we have to extend that work. And I'll show you a little bit about that. So that has to be built in the DNA of our lessons. It's not in our program in New York City. We've had to build it in ourselves. I just want to point out, because we're so short on time, that the paper I wrote for the International Literacy Association summarizes those 7 characteristics and the 10 reasons why phonics instruction sometimes fails. It's very short. It's also written so that it can be given to families of children that you're working with. It's on their website. It's free. It's downloadable. That's my email. Yes, I'm the only person left in the United States that uses AOL because I refuse to learn a new web address. I say I'm not stupid. I'm faithful. If you can't find it, I can send you a PDF. So if you want it, a lot of times we use it just as like a quick start to our conversation. We can identify areas that we want to work in. Okay, so let's dig in. Oh, I want to go through this fast because I want to get to the dictation, which is really cool. So blending is the primary strategy we teach children how to sound out words, right? Research is very clear. We need to frequently model and give students lots of opportunities. So we use what is called continuous or whole word blending, where we just run our finger under the letters and string together the sounds. Probably something you do all the time. So let's sound out this word together. Everyone? Sat. Now, you wouldn't think this was a controversial thing, but the program that we have in New York City doesn't do it this way. They do what's called segmented blending, where they do a sound at a time. So they'll go s, ah, t, put it together. What's the word? Instead of what I do, which is sat, stringing together sounds. So when I saw this, my reaction was, uh-oh. And it was uh-oh because we actually have research that talks about this. Linnea Airy, who's one of the leaders in early reading instruction, who's done some really powerful research, she and Gonzalez Frey actually studied the difference between connected blending versus that segmented blending. And they found that connected blending was far more impactful because in segmented blending, some children weren't able to hold on to the sounds. And they were saying a word with the last sound they heard. Some teachers were adding the uhs, the vocalizations in between the sounds, and it was confusing them in terms of putting the sounds together. And so we had to change that right away. Not only was that a problem, but when we looked at the data, this is part of what I call curricular surgery that we did. We had to give a cadence. There's an assessment called the nonsense word fluency. I don't know if you're familiar with this. They have to, you are? Was that a groan? I thought I heard some groans. Yeah, I understand. The nonsense word. So they would see a word like VOG. What would our students do? They wouldn't go VOG. They would go V-A-G, VOG. This is an assessment on fluency. How do you think our students did? Awful. The routine they were used to sound out words was anti-fluency. We had to stop it. We had to stop it right away and just teach them how to get through words as quickly as they can and as efficiently as you can. So even though the program was selected, there's some great things about the program, there were some things that were hurting our students. There were other things like that, but that was part of what I had to do. But anyway, so that's why we changed it. In terms of differentiation, like most programs, we start with the warm-up. Probably you do it with your program where you just show these letter cards and the children say the sounds. It takes about 60 seconds. You do the current sound, you do some previous sounds, and then you might add in some that your students are struggling with. I remember last year, a lot of classrooms I went in, they were doing W, J, G over and over because students were, there are just certain ones that students struggle with. But you can really differentiate that. The one change that we made last year is with handwriting fluency. When they hear a sound, can they immediately write the letter? How many of you have students who struggle with handwriting? I always joke I want to start a support group for handwriting, because just getting them to start in the right place is like pulling teeth. We even put the little green dot and they'll start at the bottom. So there's a lot of intensive work. We've had to do, instead of doing handwriting a couple times a week like the program suggests, we do it every day for a few minutes. It's just been that intense. But what we do our quick 60-second warm-up, then we add about another 60 to 90 seconds, and they give their whiteboards. We say a sound, they write the letter. Say another sound, they write the letter, the spellings they know, to get that fluency. How quickly can they form the letter when they hear s, or they hear a, or they hear I? Then we can do some handwriting feedback. We can do some articulation feedback. It fits in very nicely, but that has been hugely impactful. So now when they're writing, and we want them to write sad, and they think s, they're immediately writing s. And so that's been a huge help for us. So in terms of like the blending work, this is what it would look like for kindergarten. You see we're working on short I, so there are some short I words. Then there's some words with review skill, the short A, and then there's some challenge words, a skill that's a little bit later. So everyone's getting something out of that lesson. We get to long A. We're talking about long A versus short. What do you notice about, so we're doing long A spelled A-I-A-Y here. What do you notice about the first two words? Read those first two words with me. 1, 2, 3, read. And rain. So I carefully choose the first two words in any exercise that I'm doing to have an instructional conversation about the new concept we're learning, right? So I will model how to sound out ran and rain, and I will ask, what do you hear that's different? A versus A, short A versus long A. What do you see that's different? And we can emphasize that that vowel team represents that long A sound. And then after that, we will read the words together. What we do, I don't know if this will work. What we do is we have the students whisper read. I tap and say whisper, and then I tap and say all together. Whisper, all together. The reason we do that, teachers were doing choral reading. When you're doing choral reading, who do you hear? The loudest, best reader, right? And often it's very fast. So the students who are struggling don't even get an opportunity to work through the words. So by having them whisper, they all have the space to do that work and to think through the word, and then all together, then I hear them and I can provide corrective feedback. Let's just try a couple together. We'll start with this word, whisper, all together, whisper, all together, right, and we'll go on like that. We've had to have lots of instructional moments around whispering. For some students, it's harder. We have some cuppers who have to cup still, but whatever. We do what we need to do. So we have some words of the new skill. We have words from the previous 4 to 6 weeks, and then we have some challenge words. So everyone's getting something they need. When it comes to second grade, things have had to change. Second grade, how many of you work with second graders? Second grade, I think, is the hardest grade because the expectation, the expectations are so high. You have to be fluent with all these skills you learn in K1 in one syllable, but then you have to move to multisyllabic words. And the text you're reading are filled with multisyllabic words. This chart really sent shockwaves when I first saw this. These are the amount of words that children typically encounter that are multisyllabic. In first grade, you see there are very few. But you go from first grade to second grade, what happens? You go from very few to 18,000? That's this massive leap. So in a lot of instructional programs, they work on the fluency with words at the one syllable level for a very long time, but they're giving kids books that are filled with multisyllabic words. It doesn't make sense. There's this disconnect. So we do our blending work. We'll review, like here we're reviewing R-controlled AR. I know the books they're going to get are going to have words like restarting, lifeguard, bookmark. That's a huge jump. So all we do is we take some of these words and we tack on word parts. We tack on a prefix we want to focus on. Or maybe this week we're going to do a couple suffixes. Or maybe we're going to do compound words where they already know a piece of the word. So going from hard to harder, hardest, large, larger, largest, they already know a big chunk. They're just focusing on that new piece. E-R-E-S-T, we can talk about meaning, spelling changes, what have you. It's a very easy transition. Our students who are older, like our 3, 4, 5 students who are placed sort of, they need work with some of these basic skills. Just to have them doing one syllable work isn't really helpful for them. So we do this kind of leveling up, taking some of those words and building larger words where they already recognize a chunk to give them access to bigger words faster. For our 3rd through 5th students, we do these automaticity drills. There are 100 words in this grid, but what do you notice about the top half versus the bottom half? Yeah, the top half is much easier than the bottom half. So this page is differentiated. And for our students who never had structured literacy, we have 3, 4, 5 students who really struggle with some basic skills. I don't know if you have that same where you are, but we have students who their time to do this for a minute, some of them can't get past the first half. Beginning of the year, that's where they were. But anyway, so what they do, it's not 100 different words. It's like a couple rows of words repeated multiple times on top, a couple row of words repeated multiple times on the bottom. We do this 3 times a week, takes about 5 minutes. They practice reading the words, and then partner times them for a minute. They time their partner for a minute, and they write how many words they read. It's not about speed. It's about becoming automatic with a core set of words, both single and multisyllabic, with the skills we're working on. This has been the favorite activity of our 3, 4, 5 students for one very important reason. What do you think happens to this number as we go from Monday to Wednesday to Friday? It goes up. They get really excited about this. These are children who rarely see any physical evidence of growth. Every week, they know they're learning. They know they're getting better. They want to do this. And they will work really hard to see how far they can get, how automatic they can get with these words, because it shows they're learning and they're growing. So that's part of what we're doing for them. In terms of collecting data, at the end of the week, we'll pull a few students, and we just give them a word list. Some words from this week and then the previous 5 weeks. They read them, they get a check if it's accurate, a check if it's automatic. We don't have time to assess all the students every week. It's just not possible. But we could take maybe 10 to 15 minutes and assess a few, maybe 8, and then 8 the next week and so on. And what we do, because they're cumulative, is we look at them over time. So we assessed this child in short A. They got accurate on everything, but not automatic yet. We didn't expect that to be so. Then the next time we saw them, it was further down in the assessment, and the most recent time, it was at the end of the assessment, right? But what would this tell me if they got all checks here, but 5 weeks later, some of the checks were missing? The lesson is the skill slipping away, it's decaying. And that happens if we don't have that really intensive review and repetition cycle in place. So this is our alert. There's a hole that's forming in their foundation. We need to hit it hard. And this is how we stay on top of those skills. After 4 to 5 weeks, we expect check, check, check here and check, check, check for fluency. If that's not there, then we know we need to do more fluency work. It's just that sort of interim data that keeps us on top of where our students are. Oh my gosh, 7 minutes. The dictation is what I want to get to. The other thing that we've been spending a lot of time on is listening to children read. The weird thing that's happened about the science of reading movement is that we've stopped listening to children read. And part of it is because teachers were taking running records. Are you familiar with running records? But there were a lot of issues with the types of books being used and not giving us the kind of data we needed. But we're using our decodables to do sort of a running record type thing. And this is just a form I created. I'm happy to give it to anyone who wants. But we listen to children read, and we take notes about how they're self-monitoring and self-correcting. We ask some questions. Are they understanding? And we take some notes about fluency, their intonation, phrasing, what have you. By the way, we do this. We've normed it so that there are 2 days each week during the whole group lessons when the children are reading independently or with partners where the teacher will select a few students to listen to. So we have a time and a space to do this. It's not every child, but during that time we know we're going to get through some. But on the back is where we get our data. So in this particular box, if there are any fully decodable words they miss, we record them. If there are any irregular high-frequency words, we record them here. If there are any words they weren't fluent with or they had to self-correct, we write here. And this is just our scope and sequence. So we look at these words and we're like, oh my gosh, there are a lot of short E words. And if it's a lot of children, then I need to do more short E in a whole group, right? If it's only a few, I have my small group. And that's how we make some of those decisions. Make sense? Okay, let's go to dictation. 5 minutes. Okay.
Blevins, you can take 10 minutes if you'd like, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna have to give you these slides, and I'm happy to. There's a big imbalance between what we do with decoding and what we do with encoding. We do such great work in getting kids to read the words, but very little work in them spelling, and so many children struggle with spelling. What we found is if we shift the balance and we do intensive spelling, everything benefits. So we've really increased the amount of encoding work that we've done. So we start with dictation. We start with this, phonemic awareness, sound boxes. We teach our children how to stretch the sounds in words. So we give our children imaginary rubber bands because we have budget constraints and we can afford them. And I actually put imaginary rubber bands on your seat, so if you want to pick yours up. We're going to stretch the sounds of the word sat. So everyone do it with me. Sat. Don't hurt yourself. Don't flick a friend. Once again, sat. And then we use our sound boxes, and as you stretch the sounds, I'm going to move one counter into each box. You guys know this. You've done this before, right? So stretch the sounds with me. Sat. What's the word? Now, this is where phonemic awareness usually stops. But it's not very powerful if we stop there. After we've broken apart, we're going to rebuild it. What's the first sound in sat, everyone? If they're not sure, I'll go sat. What sound did I say when I tapped on this box? What letter do we write when we hear s? And we rebuild the word. We started this very early in kindergarten. The minute we can make a word, we got out our sound boxes, we broke it apart, put it together, broke it apart, put it together. So our kindergartens in October, early November, were really figuring out how words work. It really accelerated their growth. I put this on the side. Our teachers make their own slides. They're not the prettiest, but they work for us. But when we're learning a new routine, what we did last year is we just put sort of the Cliff Notes version of the routine on the slide so everyone remembered the parts. We're going to stretch the sounds. We're going to count the sounds. Our program has our children tap the sounds, but our children physically have problems with it, and they can't remember how many sounds. So we have them hold up a finger, sat, and then they can easily count 3, and we can do things with it. So we've stopped doing that, and then we're going to write it. But the reason I'm pointing this out, we did this to help our teachers with these new routines and make sure they were normed and what have you. But we had all these people visiting us from the district, other administrators who have never taught phonics, had never taught primary grades. All of a sudden, they were learning all these detailed nuances about our routine. So this was actually really great PD for our administrators and other people who are visiting our classrooms. So we've continued to do that, and then we drop it once everyone knows it. But that's been really helpful. Okay, in terms of differentiating, kindergarten, children can be all over the place, right? So we have activities where we start by just having them segment off the first sound. What's the first sound in apple, everyone? What letter do we write? Let's write that. Now we're going to do man, and we're going to stretch it out. We're going to mark it, do it, and then we might have them do it without any supports to see how they do it. Over time, we just remove the scaffolds as we see, but it helps us differentiate it. When we get to first grade, we started by doing our sound boxes and then have some that weren't. But these sound boxes, these are long A words like change, ain. What's the middle sound? How do we spell it? A-I. Stay, where's the long A sound? At the end. How do we spell? Oh, that's gray, sorry. How do we spell it? And train. I'm talking so fast, I'm losing track. But the point I'm trying to make is we're doing this very systematically with them. And then we ask, what do you notice about where the long A spelling is in these words? Do you notice the difference between where AI is and AY? So we can have that conversation about AI's in the middle, English words don't end in I, AY's at the end, to help them make really informed decisions when they're spelling new words on their own. So this has been very helpful. During small group, we give these sheets to students. This is kindergarten, this is first and second grade, and we just work with them throughout the week. This is really to get segmentation fluency in place. So we'll just do a couple words as a warm-up, maybe a couple decodable and a high-frequency word. So instead of all the materials and what have you, they just put a dot on the box for each sound they hear. So let's say we're doing sat. So say the sounds. Sat. So they would put a little dot, and then they have to slash the ones where it's not there. We call it slash the trash. The kids think that's funny. So they have to slash the trash, and then they go back and they write a sound, or they write a spelling for each sound. And they're just doing it at their pace, but we want them to do it quickly so we can, it's a small group, so we can quickly check. When they're finished, they have to write the word in their best handwriting. So they get that practice. So if we're doing a high frequency word like said, what are the sounds in said, everyone? Slash the trash. What's the first sound in said? What letter do we write? What's the middle sound in said? Do we write E? What do we write? Yeah, that's that word we have to remember. And then we work through that, do it that way. So that's been very, very helpful, but we're trying to get segmentation fluency in place during small group. Another thing that we do during small group is we do, twice a week, we do what's called speed round dictation, because kids are all over the place, right? So imagine you have your table there, and you have like 6 spots, right? You have your whiteboards. You only have 15 minutes for each group, say. So you're going to call over for 5 minutes. This first group, they're meeting grade level expectations. You want to make sure that you're really maintaining that short O skill. So you're going to do a couple words in a simple sentence, 5 minutes, they're done. You call over the next group. Those are students who are still working some previous skills. So might do a word or two with short O and then a previous skill in a simple sentence. Takes about 5 minutes because you're going to have to give more supports. They're done, they leave. You call over a group that they're further ahead. So you're doing some short O words, but this time with blends and digraphs and some other short vowels they're working on in a more complex sentence. See what I'm done? 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. 15 minutes, I met with 18 children. That's almost all the kids. Do it twice a week. Some children get double dose of really targeted differentiated work, and all we had to do was to organize in that way. Okay, I have 4 more minutes. This is another thing that we do starting in 2nd grade. Our 2nd grade teachers, who are my 2nd grade teachers again? Our 2nd grade teachers are like, you want my children to spell retaking and mistaking? They can't spell take. So what we started doing are dictation chains, where we look at the grade level word and we back map it to where some of our students are, so that we do it on whiteboards. We have them write take. We put it on the board, check and correct. Most children get that one right. Then we go to taking, write it underneath, check and correct. What's the mistake? We talked about this already. Yeah, so a lot of them we'll have to talk about, dropping the E, adding ing, so they correct it. Underneath that, so some of our students are here, but underneath that, we're doing a grade level word retaking. What do they have to do to write that? They just have to think about the prefix, that separate chunk, write re, and they're copying taking a second time, which is a word they're struggling with. What do they do under that? Mistaking. What do they have to do? Replace that prefix re with miss, and then copy taking again. Do you see how our lower level kids are getting some intensive work, but they're also getting words at grade level expectations? So we've had to do a lot of this. So in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we'll do maybe 1 or 2 chains as a warm-up every day, working on spelling skills. Sometimes we may do a whole week or multiple weeks on spelling changes with suffixes, like doubling the final the things that are really hard for them. And we'll do that as part of our differentiated work, as part of our warm-up. In terms of collecting data, we create really basic, simple tools. This is one that I created. It's just a list of the scope and sequence, phonics scope and sequence for the year, a blank column for mastery, a blank column for examples. When we teach a skill, it's in their writer's notebook. The children circle the skill, and every 3 or 4 weeks in one of our planning sessions with the teachers, we'll look at their writer's notebooks. We'll look at all the skills that have been circled, short A's and some blends, and we'll flip through and see, do we see consistent and accurate use of that skill? If we do, we record some words and put a check that they're moving toward mastery. But you see here, there are some places where there are no checks. So every 3 to 4 weeks, we can look at these and see, oh my gosh, a lot of our students struggling with blends. I got to do more work during the whole group. Or, oh my gosh, it's only a few. Now I know what to do for that small group dictation. It's that little piece of data. The other way that we've collected data, instead of doing spelling words at the end of the week, we just do cumulative sentences that we dictate. We carefully construct them. We're doing ow words, spelled O-U-O-W here, so we have time to dictate 4 sentences. You see the ow words. I looked at the skills from the previous 5 weeks and put in a bunch of words of those skills. So then I can track over time. So ow words are week 24, but they're going to be ow words in week 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. I can track it over time. Are they getting better or are they getting worse? It's just a really easy thing for us. But all we do is we circle the words that have mistakes, and we just write the spellings at the bottom. O-U, E-W, whatever it is. We flip through. We see a lot of children struggling with O-U, O-W. Have to do more work. Only a few. I have my small group. Do you see what we're trying to do? Just kind of fold in very easily things that we'd naturally do, but be very strategic about how we organize that work so we can collect data that we can then respond to. Okay, we are out of time. I wanted to talk about decodable text, but I can't. So I'm going to show you just very quickly some of the things that are in the slideshow. We do a lot of work with syntax in terms of understanding how sentences are created. We take complex sentences from our decodable text, and we'll have students echo as we build meaning. So echo after me. She had to wait.
She had to wait.
Where?
In the long line.
Why?
To get inside.
We want students to know that different parts of sentences carry meaning because we have them write about their decodable text. And what we do is we give them frames. The girl went, and they have to write the gist for the story, but they have to tell me the where, the when, and the why. And so they add these parts. We're checking understanding, but they're also understanding that different parts of sentences carry meaning. They're understanding how sentences work. And they're also creating really complex sentences very early on. So in this slide, I'm going to show you some of the things that we do for kindergarten to differentiate it. We had kindergartners write earlier than our kindergarten teachers were comfortable with. So we created response sheets. If students were at level 1, let's say we just read the story, The Bus, we asked a question, the typical answer would be the bus got stuck. Like, what happened in the story? Our level 1 students would get a sheet of paper that said the bus got stuck on the top for them to read. They would copy it underneath and then draw a picture with details about where and how the bus got stuck. Our level 2 students, where most of them were, would get an incomplete sentence, the blank got stuck, and a word bank, B-U-G, B-U-S, S-U-B. They have to put in the right answer to complete the sentence that makes sense. They'd copy it underneath and then draw a picture that shows where and when, and our above level students would just get a sentence starter with 2 blanks. They have to add the where and the why, or the where and the how. They look like this. Response sheets, different levels. So we were able to differentiate the writing in early kindergarten and slowly move children from level 1 to level 2. Yes, we're out of time, I think. Okay, so there's stuff about that. One of the things that we had to do for our reluctant writers in terms of retelling, we had sentence frames and things. We found that that wasn't working. We had to do more detailed kinds of frames. So retelling frames with the signal words. The girl went to, then she, after that at the end. So they'd practice orally, then practice in writing. So we've had to do a lot of these different kinds of supports. I am going to stop there. Even when we have the students read decodables on their own, we were finding that we didn't know if they were really doing it. So we needed some accountability. So we started giving them these response sheets in my spelling book where they read a decodable and they have to fill in, they have to tell me what it's about by filling in the who, the did what, the where, and the when. Or it's a nonfiction, so they have to fill in this. The text is about one thing I learned, another thing. Or the problem was we give them these response sheets that correspond to the big idea in the story so that when they're going off and reading on their own, they're filling this in. And then the picture that they're drawing, they're adding words from the book that show details. So they're actually doing some more writing. So these are some of the things. That's as far as I can get. Yeah, I know, we have to stop. I'm so sorry. I thought I would talk faster. If you want the slideshow, I'm happy to give it to you. If there are things that we didn't go over or I spoke too quickly, I'm happy to have further conversations with you. My email, did you get my email? It's really WBNY, Wiley Blevins, New York, easy to remember. At where, everybody? Am I foolish or just a good customer? Loyal. Thank you. Some would say foolish, but it's okay. Do you want to come up?
Thank you so much. Well, we can take a few questions. Okay. Yeah, let's make sure we get a few questions. So if anybody has a question for Mr. Blevins, please raise your hand. All right, I'll give you a mic right over here.
Good evening. My name is Mia, and I teach kindergarten with DCPS. One, thank you for sharing your work. Just curious how you all share this work with the parents. If you could just talk a little bit about how you inform the parents and how you get them involved.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question with our school because a lot of our parents don't speak English. So we have a lot of parent events for them. There's information that's sent every week. They know the routine of the books that we send home and things like that and what our expectations are, but we don't assume that anything happens. We assume that it has to happen at school. That's really our take. It's lovely if there are things that happen, but we don't assume that. So we communicate, we send things home, we have copies, like black and white copies of books and all of that, and they know that that's going to come home, but we take on the full responsibility with our students. Yeah. I will say there's a school district I work with in Connecticut, and they use a program where the kindergartners actually will, when they're working like on a center or what have you, they actually take a picture of their completed work or they record themselves reading, and it's uploaded, and the parents get to see that every day. And that I really, really love. Are you guys familiar with that? Yeah, so I see some nods, some of you use that. And the kindergartners can do it with no problem whatsoever. And so they have a constant flow of information throughout the week, watching their children actually read and engage in these activities. Mm-hmm.
Good evening. My name is Alicia, and this is my son, Jag.
Welcome, Jay.
Jag.
I love your glasses.
My question is, how are you incorporating and accelerating the SPED population? My son has one of the 13 identified disabilities, so he has an IEP,
Yes.
and he's in an inclusive learning environment.
That's like our 12 to 1s. Yes. All those teachers get the same training that all the other teachers get. And they're using the same resources, but on the where we've assessed where the students are. And so there's really, those are probably the classrooms where the happiest for people to come visit, because they don't know that it's a 12 to 1 unless we tell them. Because the kinds of things that are happening, the supports that we provided are the kinds of things that you would see all the time. There of course, there are behavior issues and things like that that those teachers are dealing with, but no, the expectations are the same. And they use the same routines and what have you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. 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 Yeah. You should come visit. You should come visit. Yeah. We're very, very proud of those classrooms because what we see happening is really dynamic. The expectations are very high. Look, sometimes it's more intensive and sometimes it's a bit slower. We have more repetition or what have you, but it's all built into the same structures, and we're seeing growth. Mm-hmm. The silent letters? Sign is a great one. So there are words in which there are letters that, like sign. What's the letter we don't hear in sign, everyone? So we will teach sign, and we will explain that the GN represents the N sound. But then underneath sign, we will write signal. And underneath that, we'll write signature. And we'll talk about how the morpheme, the basic unit meaning, the sound might change, but the spelling never changes. What's really interesting about spelling, that's been a big learning curve for our teachers because they didn't have this instruction when they were at university, is in K1 and 2, phonics really plays a big role in spelling. But once we start getting to multisyllabic words, the morpheme is more important because it's so stable across all the words. And so our instruction has to really shift. We do significantly more related word work than has ever been done before because of that. It just doesn't exist in programs. But when you see the regularities across related words, and you see that chunk that never changes in spelling, could change in pronunciation, but never in spelling, these things start making more and more sense. Sometimes, like a word like sword, sometimes we will explain why that is, although it's not terribly interesting necessarily to a 7 or 8 year old. But a word like sword comes from an old English word swear. So the w was heard. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
Or the consonant sounds
Yeah.
that we have.
Yep.
And how do you teach them to form these sounds?
So it's a constant focus. We do articulation throughout every part of our phonics lesson. So if you are a native Spanish speaker, for example, our children, they will always pronounce a vowel sound in a very specific way that might not sound exactly like a native speaker. So they learn that the way they're saying that sound is spelled in this way. So we connect it in that way. We also do a lot of, like if we do dictation, if we don't do any articulation work, like if we dictate a word like send, we'll get SED from a lot of kids. Or best, we'll get, because they're not hearing all the sounds. So just having them fully articulate and listen to all the sounds is really, really helpful as well. But you're not going to change the way they necessarily make a sound, but you can help them attach how they're saying it to the English spellings in a more systematic and explicit way. And that's what we focus on. Yeah.
I'm curious, do you have hardcore data on the number of students who need Tier 3 intervention? Has it significantly reduced since you implemented these measures in your school?
I would say significantly because we're just in like a year and a half. So we're the first year, it's such a dramatic shift. We saw a little bit, but we didn't see like oh my gosh, the world has changed. It was the second year when we started seeing that impact for our students. And keep in mind, the only children who have had this fully is our kindergartners who are now in first grade. So what we started this year was some intensive work with our older, because the district is focusing on K2. But I'm in a class, in a school where 3, 4, 5 students aren't anywhere near they need to be in terms of fluency, and it's driving me crazy. So we started 3, 4, 5. We have, one of the things I got the superintendent to do is to mandate a 20-minute protected time for fluency, K5. So in K2, that's when we do intensive decodable text reading and all the things associated with that. In 3, 5, that's where we put into place some very specific kinds of things that we're doing, where they're getting some meaty phonics instruction. They're doing those automaticity drills. There are short passages that they're reading that reinforce those skills. Like, we have a whole system in place. We've used our data for our students who are in the yellow, who are like bubble kids. They get an extra dose of fluency. We use Reader's Theater for that because I think it's fun, and they'll read those things over and over and build that automaticity. So we have a plan in place to support that in 3, 4, 5, because it's a massive issue. They can read the words okay. They're just, one of the things I did at the beginning of the year is I shared some information about the Hasbrook and Tyndall fluency norms, the expectations. And when our third grade teachers saw what's at the 50th percentile, which is where we want, 50th or higher, they knew their children were nowhere near that. And it really set a fire under them, like, oh my gosh. They've had 3 years and they're not coming to me anywhere near they need to be. We have to attend to this in a powerful way. The fact that we have that protected time has helped us, because now we can just focus on it. And we're seeing a lot of growth there.
Thank you.
But I will say about 3, 4, 5, our biggest challenge is our 3, 4, 5 teachers never taught phonics. And they've never had any linguistic work. So that's been the heavy lift for us, is giving them that background information. Because when we started, they were like, Wiley, I don't know any of this. I've never done this. This is terrifying. And so we've really had to do some intensive support and PD for them for that. Mm-hmm.
What, I didn't hear or see much on phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. What do you see as the role of it in instruction, and how is it administered in the programs you're working with?
So that's a super great question, because it's been a big point of anxiety for me in New York City, because they understood that phonological awareness wasn't done well in the resource they have. So they bought another resource that was the best thing that was out there at the time, and they mandated 10 minutes a day of phonemic awareness. The problem with that is I would go into a classroom, kindergarten classroom in November, and I see children clapping syllables. And then I go to the phonics lesson where they're supposed to read and write words, where they have to be operating at the phoneme level. There was no connection between what was happening. So there was all this wasted time and no connection whatsoever. So we've had to streamline it. It took me almost the entire year to get permission to do this, me complaining over and over and over that I need those minutes to do other things. But we've sort of scaled it down to what is actually connected to our reading and writing goals. Segmentation, super important. But just doing it isolated isn't going to move the needle. We need to connect it to print. So how do we do that? Can we do that? So we've had to restructure that, and we're just focusing on the things that matter. So like the program has them orally blend words for like years. But if they can sound out a word, they don't need to do it in isolation. They're practicing when they're reading words. When we do dictation, what's the first thing you do when you do dictation? You have to orally segment. It's already in the program. What do we do when we're building our word change, going from sat to mat to mad? You're orally segmenting and orally manipulating sounds and showing your understanding with letters. It's in the program. Why do we have to do 10 minutes of isolated? The research doesn't support that. So it's been a really hard journey getting the people who have the power in New York City to understand that and let me take that time, trim it back, and let them understand it's already folded in what we're doing. It's more impactful because it's connected to print. That's been a huge, huge struggle. And to be perfectly honest, New York City teachers are not shy. And so when I said I wanted to take some time away from that 10 minutes, they pushed back. They're like, this is fun. I said, you know what? It is fun. I went into your classroom, your second grade classroom, and I saw children doing this for like 10 minutes. I said, I don't know what the instructional value of it was, but they had a great movement break. And if your goal was a movement break, you did it. But if it's instructional, you didn't. So I'm a little nicer to that when I talk to them. I really am nice.
We'll do one last question.
But
guys,
sometimes
one
you just
last
have to
question.
tell it like it is. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And the amount of support that you're able to offer the schools is inspiring. Are you actually welcoming visitors to come up and see?
Yeah.
Okay, that's exciting. And specifically, I think some of the curriculums, I'm understanding what they might be. The things that you're showing there, are those sold in your books? Or like, you know, I'm really motivated by what you're saying about those fluency drills for the older kids, those word lists, all of that. That's all the stuff that you just created to supplement the curriculum?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of it exists in materials that we are using or I brought in from other resources I've created. Like the Sadlier friends back there, they like those blending lines that had like the word and the Spanish translation. They created it for us because I needed it. So we've been able to get some of those supports made for us and other things that we've created.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're happy to share those things.
If we email you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, we've had one person with a hand up for quite a while, so I'm going to go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine. I have a question about time. I'm hearing you say 40 minutes for phonics, direct instruction, small group time, 10 minutes for what I'm assuming is Haggerty phonemic awareness. What is the length of the block? Because in all of this, you haven't done any language comprehension, so we know there's still another component of their day. How much time do they dedicate to ELA in total?
Yeah. It varies by grade. But so this is the weird thing about New York, that we're a land of silos, and I have to make those silos be a unified country. That's been part of the work. But they actually adopted a reading program that the whole city has to use just for what you're talking about, the building knowledge and the comprehension piece of it. And so there's a devoted time, 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the grade, where that's all they're doing there in K2.
So if you're talking about their full block, are you 120 minutes, 90 minutes? I'm just trying to figure out how they're...
So this is why I'm hesitating, because it varies by school in our district. But it's typically 2.5 hours is what we have.
Okay.
Yeah, when you include all the writing.
Yeah.
Because they have a writing curriculum too as well. But it's not a solid block. It happens. It's
they break it up.
chunked. Yeah. So we don't have that luxury. But even the fluency. You know, the superintendent said mandate 20 minutes for fluency for decodable text. Now, the lab school I'm at, we were already doing that, so it was not a problem. We started a second lab school this year because we needed a space for more visitors, and this school's a bit larger. It has 10 classrooms per grade, so we have a lot of places for people to visit. But that principal's like, no, I'll give you 5, and then the kids can go off and read on their own. And I was like, that's not going to work. So we had to carve down the 40 minutes to take 10 from that and 10 from the next, or 5 from the next thing on some day. So every principal has kind of carved it out themselves. And so I have to work within those constraints.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can't rule the world. So
A round of applause for Mr. Wiley Blevins, please.